You've spelunked into the Mat Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Mat Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week is going to be a basketball roundup. Not many rants when it comes to this one. It's just that I want to warn you all, I am falling pretty much out of love with the sport and the game of basketball. I might talk about why in another episode, like in the off season or something, but I'm just kind of over it. But I will continue to talk about it, so don't worry about it. Then I'll talk about the Utah Mammoth, both their performance on the ice and their performance off of the ice, as well as Real Salt Lake and their home opener. How did they do? How did they look? And who's actually suiting up for the team? So that all of that and more to come on this episode. Thank you all again so much for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you more than you could possibly imagine. You all are awesome people. I'll just leave it at that. You're just awesome people. As always, share this with one person that you think might enjoy the program. It helps me out a ton. And like the video, comment, rate, wherever it is, however you listen. Helps me out a ton. And let's just dive into things, shall we? So let's start with the Utah Jazz. And they are tanking correctly now, I guess, according to the NBA. No fines have come their way yet. They almost sent their own doctors to do a independent review of Lauri Markkanen's MRI. As soon as Tony Jones reported that, I'm going to say, now there's nothing behind this, there's no reporting or anything like this, but I'm going to say the NBA backed out because somebody blew the whistle on them. And so they said, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're just going to review it like we do with every other team. Well, everybody's on to your game, Adam Silver, and we're tired of it. So just shut up and let the teams do their thing. But Lauri Markkanen's out for at least 2 weeks. He's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks' time. That was, 3 days ago? So a week and a half. But the Jazz have lost, or did they win? 2 key games against a fellow tank-off opponent in the New Orleans Pelicans. It was a back-to-back game situation here in Utah for New Orleans and Utah. Utah lost both games, so the Pelicans have now overtaken them, or have the Jazz overtaken the Pelicans? I don't know. This gets really confusing when you talk about it. But the Pelicans now have a better record than the Jazz. In fact, the Pelicans have won 4 games in a row, whereas the Jazz have lost 5. That's pretty good news, right? As far as the tanking is concerned. How many teams remain below/above Utah for lottery balls? Well, the worst team in the league right now is the Sacramento Kings. I don't know why the NBA isn't investigating that franchise for tanking. Indiana Pacers, they lost a superstar. They should not have been fined. They also lost their center to free agency in the offseason. So, they were just in the NBA Finals. Or just give me a break, man. Fining the Pacers for that, fining the Jazz, who are a top 10 winning percentage team, like I said in a couple episodes ago, a top 10 winning percentage franchise in your league. Why aren't you fining the Knicks? Why aren't you fining the Kings? Oh, yeah. It's because you have a target painted on the Jazz. And you just threw in the Pacers because, well, we can't be too blatant with our actions here. Anywho, other teams with a worse record than the Jazz, other than the Kings and Pacers, would be the Brooklyn Nets, who should be investigated time immemorial for everything they've done, including their time with assistant GM Bobby Marks. He was never the full GM. Maybe that's why he hates the Jazz. He hates the Jazz because of Danny Ainge hoodwinking him in that trade for the Big Three. Anywho, so the Nets and the Washington Wizards. So that is 4 teams that have a worse record than the Jazz as we head into the final stretch of the season here. There's 22 games left in the NBA season, much like the NHL season, where there's 22 games left for that one for the Mammoth. And with the way that the Jazz are going to have to do this, I think that's going to be where they remain. If they lose too often and too blatantly, I guess, for the NBA's liking, and by the NBA, I mean the sports books. Yeah, the NBA is run by the sports books. Don't let it get you twisted. But I think this is where the Jazz will remain. And then Adam Silver is going to move hell and high water to make sure the Jazz fall out of the top 8 picks where their pick is protected from the Pelicans. Or not from the Pelicans, from the Thunder. And, sorry, I saw the Pelicans logo on my screen. And make sure that that pick gets conveyed to Sam Presti because Sam Presti is Adam Silver's best bud. Sam Presti, if you don't know, is the GM of the Oklahoma City Thunder, where a lot of this ire, angst, and hand-wringing about the Jazz and the integrity of a league that's never had an ounce of it came from. So, there you have that. And by the way, the Thunder tanked for years. They tanked for years, and nobody said boo. Anyway, that's another episode. I might do a whole episode on just all of that this coming off season when there's not much else to talk about. But that is the outlook for the Jazz. Expect them to lose a lot and often, but not so often and so blatantly that the NBA comes down on them again. But if you look at their point differential, they're not even the worst in the league, which is wild to say because they're the worst defensive team in the league. I mean, the Kings, the Wizards, they have worse point differentials than the Jazz. The Nets. I mean, it could go on and on and on here, and I can play the victim all you want, but won't change anything. All right, let's move on to college basketball. The Utah Utes continue to lose, as is expected. They have 2 games left against Colorado at home on March 3rd, and then at Baylor to wrap up the season. And like I've said before, it's about creating an identity, creating a culture around the basketball program. And when you look at like their recruiting record or whatever, that's not what college basketball is about anymore. It's not about incoming freshman recruits unless you can get one of those top 10 guys. It's about transfers. It's about getting guys who were really good at whatever school they were at, and they want to move up into bigger time basketball. That is the recruiting that you want to keep tabs on. So if you want to go to this Utah Utes Colorado Buffaloes game to see the final game of the first season of the Jensen era, I mean, tickets are like $8. So you got nothing else to do. March 3rd at 7 o'clock. $8 to go watch Utah basketball against Colorado. I mean, I guess there are worse things you could do with your time. Anyway, Terrence Brown, very fun player to watch. I would encourage you, if you want to watch a basketball game on the cheap and you don't want to watch the Jazz lose on purpose, go watch the Utes and watch Terrence Brown. Worth the price of admission, I think. For $8, definitely. Utah State. I need to stop talking nice about Utah State. After that win against Boise State, they lost in the upset against Nevada, and then they lost at San Diego State by 17. They did beat Grand Canyon at home to right the ship a little bit. They closed out the season at UNLV, which is always a tough game for any team. And then at home against New Mexico, who they are currently only 1 game ahead of in the Mountain West. So the Aggies control their destiny when it comes to the regular season crown. They do. And I fully anticipate them winning it. It will take them having to win, obviously, both games. If they win both games, they close out with 3 straight wins. They win the title hands down. So they control their own destiny. But if they stumble against UNLV, then the pressure ticks up to a fever pitch against New Mexico. The good news there is that the game against New Mexico is at home. It is a revenge game for the Lobos because Utah State blew them out by 20 in their own barn. I mean, you can't write the drama much better than this for Utah State when it comes to basketball. They control their destiny. They really do. You win, you're in. You're into the NCAA tournament. You have the number 1 seed in the Mountain West Conference tournament. The world is your oyster, Utah State. Don't let my kind words derail you yet again. I anticipate Utah State beating UNLV. I really do. I know I said that about Nevada, but, you know, that was kind of a look-ahead game because of San Diego State immediately following. But I don't think UNLV is going to get looked over by Utah State. At least I hope not. But this Utah State team is really solid. They're not overly great at rebounding the basketball. They're tied for 269th in the country. But their points per game is really good. Their assists per game is really good. Their points allowed is also really good. All of those are in the top 50 in the NCAA, which is really good for essentially a mid-major team that Utah State is. I mean, this is a team that could make a run in March It really is, depending on how the dominoes fall when it comes to seeding and who is in their bracket. But it's been a wildly successful season yet again up in Logan. They continue to do it. And for whatever reason, whoever the head coach is, it doesn't matter. It seems like it almost doesn't matter. There's just something in the water up there in Logan where they just pump out solid basketball teams. So good stuff from the Aggies this season. By far and away the best team in the state of Utah, and that's including the Jazz. And now let's move on to BYU. I'm not going to rail on BYU or Kevin Young, AJ DeBonsa, Rob Wright. I'm not going to rail on any of them. I've said my piece about roster construction, anticipating the slog that is a Big 12 basketball season, expecting injuries. Like, I've talked about all of it. It's just a sad season. I'm just going to leave it at that. Is it over? It's getting close. It's getting harder and harder to justify putting BYU as a bubble team into the NCAA tournament, even with AJ DeBonsa. Is it going to happen? Probably. I don't foresee the NCAA keeping BYU out of the NCAA tournament because of AJ DeBonsa. They want to see him play in March. But if they lose at Cincinnati, which they probably will, because it's realistically it's like 2.5 guys against a full team. It's DeBonsa, who's playing hurt, Rob Wright, who's also playing hurt, and Kibakita, who fouls out every game against the opposing team. So, honestly, I don't see BYU winning any games the rest of the season. They have 2 left at Cincinnati March 3rd, and then senior night against Texas Tech on March 7th. At home, Texas Tech is playing without their best player, but BYU is playing without, their entire roster. So, it's tough for me to gauge. It really is. A season that started with so much promise, where they had 1 loss through like the first 22 games, and then it just all fell apart. After that game against Arizona and then the game against Kansas, it just fell apart. So, rough go of it. Fly too close to the sun, you get burned. That's what happened with BYU and signing the number 1 overall recruit. Hopefully there is lessons to be learned from not just the players, but the coaching staff, trainers, the athletic staff. I've always had a problem with BYU's athletic trainers and their strength and conditioning crews, dating back to Luke Staley. But again, another episode for another day. And just watching this team they just ball watch. They don't move anymore. And that's inexcusable for me when I watch teams play. Like, why do you just sit and then you just watch AJ DeBonsa or you watch Rob Wright play the game? Move, set screens, set off-ball screens, move around, get open, set on-ball screens, pass screens, like, move. It's not that hard. And yet you look at the guys that are trotting out there with AJ DeBonsa and Rob Wright, they're just watching those 2 guys play. It's like 1 screen from Kibakita. That's it. Let's just watch those 2. It's kind of embarrassing, and that's on coaching. But again, I've already said my piece on all of it. It's just a sad season. That's really all it boils down to. It's a sad season. All right, on to a happy season. The Utah Mammoth, they are in control of their own destiny. They hold the number 1 wildcard spot in the NHL, which is wildly exciting for me. They are also rumored to be adding a very significant piece to their roster in the form of Robert Thomas from the St. Louis Blues. To give you an idea, that would be adding, let's see. Let's go with basketball parlance. It's not in the realm of adding Luka Doncic. It's not that high up, but it's like the Miami Heat adding Chris Bosh to their big 3. I think that's the best connection I can make here for everybody to understand. So that is how big of a deal getting a Robert Thomas would be. A glue guy, a guy that puts all of the talent together, solves the issue of the team, and propels them to greater heights. They are linked to this guy. He's 26 years old. He is a number one center for his team. He's captain material. He's a leader in the locker room. And GM Bill Armstrong is the guy who drafted him in St. Louis before he became the GM for the Arizona Coyotes / Utah Hockey Club / Utah Mammoth. This is a big deal. A lot of smoke has popped up over just the last 2 days about a potential trade for Robert Thomas happening, and then for the Utah Mammoth to be one of the key players in this trade talk. You've heard me talk about them adding Vincent Trocheck, the guy that you all probably know from the Olympics. He is a very good two-way center. He was a key player when it came to the penalty kill that the U.S. was 100% on. And then also Elias Pettersson, who is a Swede that plays for the Vancouver Canucks, who are having just an awful season. And he is just a couple seasons removed from a 100-point season. That means he scored assists and goals to the tune of 100 points in one season. That's very hard to do, unless your name is Nikita Kucherov or Nathan McKinnon. Then it's like falling out of bed. But he's only a couple seasons removed from that. I've stated my case as to why I think he would be a good addition, but not as good as Robert Thomas. Robert Thomas is 26 years old. He's got a lot of runway left on his contract. He plays that premium position of center in the NHL, which would take a lot of the pressure and weight off of Logan Cooley to kind of have to carry the team in that position. It would mean Utah gets to move on from Barrett Hayton because he would have to be included on the deal. And then Utah could also move on from Nick Schmaltz and the drama of will he, won't he re-sign. It's becoming more and more apparent that Nick Schmaltz wants to test free agency, as is his right. This season, he's earned the right to hit the free agency market, especially in a market that's as weak as this one is going to be. The talisman of the free agent market is not going to be a household name. And so teams that think they're close, they're one player away, are going to overpay for somebody like Nick Schmaltz. So I see the wisdom in him continuing this awesome season he's having with us here in Utah and issuing that into a huge contract. Because another thing for you guys out there, my dear spelunkers, the salary cap in the NHL is rising over the next 3 years. So players are going to be getting more money. So yes, while it would be sad to see Nick Schmaltz go, I think if you include him on this trade, it would sweeten the pot enough to where the Blues can't say no. So for me, the deal going back to St. Louis to get Robert Thomas and maybe even a contract they don't want anymore would be Caleb Desnoyers. This one hurts Utah Mammoth fans a lot. I've gotten a lot of blowback on including him in this deal, but hear me out. Caleb Desnoyers was the 4th overall pick in this most recent draft. Utah was not expecting to get that draft. Utah was expecting to be in the low teens to high teens in that draft. Utah, the Mammoth, got lucky, and they moved up to number 4. Why not roll that luck into a proven, established NHL centerman that can move the needle now and in the future because he's only 26? He fits the roster timeline and age group seamlessly, and you get to move on from the label that you have of never moves prospects. That is, I think, a valuable currency that Bill Armstrong can hold, where in the past, in his run as GM, he hasn't moved a prospect. He just doesn't do that. Now, some people might contend with me, oh, well, what about Josh Doan and Michael Kesselring? Those guys weren't prospects anymore. Both were on the Utah Hockey Club roster at the end of the season, and Michael Kesselring was on the roster the entire year. So they kind of graduated from prospect into NHL player to get JJ Peterka. So you kind of shed the label that you've kind of created for yourself because you've had to, because let's face it, the Coyotes were never going to spend money in free agency. And no player really wanted to go there. That image is changing with Utah, with how the fans show up and show out every single night, how loud the Delta Center gets. There's also the state-of-the-art practice facility They get to hang out with the NBA team as well. There's a lot of cross-pollination there. So you get to build your image, and you're in a media market that's not as rabid and always on your back like a Canadian team or New York, LA, stuff like that, you know? So you get to shed the label. You get to put the pedal to the floor a little bit more as this rebuild comes to a head, and you get a really, really, really good player. So the package, if I can continue on that, I kind of got off on a tangent there. It would start with Barrett Hayton and Nick Schmaltz and Caleb Desnoyers. Those three, I mean, you could omit Nick Schmaltz to start, and you start with Caleb Desnoyers and Barrett Hayton, and then 2 unprotected first-round picks from Utah going to St. Louis. The Mammoth control their first-round picks from now into the future. That's another thing that Bill Armstrong kind of has a label. He doesn't trade first-round picks. You can shed 2 labels at once here. Be seen as a guy who can make deals and is willing to make deals that are both hockey deals as well as just trades. And you upgrade your roster. You shed Barrett Hayton, who has, from me in particular, been labeled a bust. He gets to start over somewhere. He's a restricted free agent after this season. So if he doesn't re-sign with the Blues and he gets an offer sheet from a different club, the Blues get a draft pick. So the reason I have these guys as the trade is because the general manager of the Blues has stated he wants a Quinn Hughes-type package coming back. Well, what does that mean? Obviously, we all know Quinn Hughes from the Olympics. The brother to Jack Hughes, the guy who beat the Swedes in overtime, second best defenseman in the NHL behind Cale Makar. You know, he wants a package that the Vancouver Canucks got for him when he was moved from Vancouver to Minnesota. What was that package? It was essentially 4 first-round picks. The Wild sent back 2 players who were first-round picks. I think it was 3 players that were first-round picks and an unprotected first-round pick in this upcoming draft. The Mammoth can do that, and it wouldn't dent their future in any meaningful fashion. So I'm saying Caleb Desnoyers because I want to get the deal done. But if it is 4 first-round picks, how flexible are they on those first-round picks? Could it be a Maverick Lamoureux instead of Caleb Desnoyers? Could it be a Daniil Boot? Or could it be an Artyom Duda? Like, these guys were all first-round picks. It's just the weight that the Blues have behind those players. But this is a deal that definitely can get done. For those of you who don't know, the NHL trade deadline is March 6th. So there is still some time in between now and then for a deal to get done, for a deal, you know, for the conversation to happen. But this really accelerated this past weekend because more reporting is coming out about these 2 teams talking, and specifically talking about 2 players. Justin Falk, a right-handed defenseman who I don't think that's a real conversation because he's just outside of the age grouping that Bill Armstrong wants. And then Robert Thomas, the centerman who could be a premier centerman. He's not done growing either. And he would be on a line with Clayton Keller and Lawson Krause, or Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz. So this could be a stellar trade for the Mammoth. And it would be the kind of trade that Bill Armstrong has done recently. The Mikhail Sergachev trade, the John Marino trade, and the JJ Peterka trade. This would just be another jewel in his cap to get this done. Another feather in his cap, jewel in his crown, whatever you want to call it. I mixed the 2 there. As you can tell, I'm very excited about the possibility of this trade. I'm probably going to get let down. It's probably not going to happen just because of how the 2 front offices function. For the Blues, it's probably just like, hey, we're talking about you, play better. And for the Mammoth, it's more of being in the news but not of the news because you want to be seen as a major player, but you don't quite want to pull the trigger yet. That's probably what's going to happen, but I don't want that to happen. I want the trade to happen. So that's why I'm talking about it. I talked about it on Utah Mammoth Daily. I'm talking about it here. I want it to happen. All right, let's move it right along to Real Salt Lake. They won. They beat the Seattle Sounders. They won their home opener. It was 2-1. And boy, did Rafael Cabral, the goaltender for Real Salt Lake, do everything in his power to keep it 2-1. Real Salt Lake's defense is, I'm going to use the word suspect at best. On set pieces, there were free runners all over the place. My goodness, it was like watching a marathon. Nobody was covered. So that needs to get fixed. It needs to get fixed yesterday. It was set pieces, it was free kicks, and it was corners. And those guys for Seattle were just wide open all over the place. So, yeah. Very, very scary moments. But what I loved to see was something that was not really happening last year. And that was the back three, I would say back five of Real Salt Lake was kicking the ball into space to allow their young forwards to run onto the ball instead of trying to do this patient build-up play that happens at the top tier of soccer. You know, patient build-up, look at Arsenal, Manchester City, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid. They do patient build-up. Whereas in the MLS, you don't have to play like the big boys. The talent isn't there. So you can do long balls. You can kick the ball into space and expect your guy to win the race. Hey, that rhymed. But that's what Real Salt Lake has up front. They have a bunch of young guys who are quick that can run onto the ball and then win the second ball. So the defender wins the ball off of that long kick, but then your guy gets it back, kicks it backwards to your team coming up, and you get a chance that way. That is where Diego Luna thrives. He thrives off of that second ball win. And so when he comes back healthy after his knee heals up, hoo boy, this could be a very exciting offense. But the defense is really bad, guys. I cannot emphasize enough just how spotty Real Salt Lake's defense is. Especially on the corner kick where Seattle scored. It felt like the Real Salt Lake's defenders cared more about defending space than they did actual players. So it looked like they were playing like a zone sort of defense. Each player has an area, and then as an opposing player runs into that area, you mark that man. I hate that kind of defense in soccer because you can just overload, right? You can overload a zone with 2 or 3 guys, and then you score a goal. That's what Arsenal's brilliant at. So maybe while that's easier to coach for the young players, just go man on man. Just say, I have 23. I have 48. I have that guy. And then just do it. It's easier to get screened off. I get it. Pick plays happen in corner kicks all the time. But you'll have a higher success rate, I think. But this could be a fun season for Real Salt Lake where they will score some goals if they can continue to play like they did against Seattle, where you pressure the ball constantly because you're young, you have the legs, and then you get the ball into space and you let your creativity take over. Especially when Diego Luna comes back. All right, everybody, that is the episode for today. Pokémon 30 years. They announced Wind and Waves as the newest generation, Generation 10, I believe. It looks gorgeous. There are fans that are angry it won't be coming to Switch 1, only to the Switch 2. I argue that is great because look at the graphical differences between the two. Holy moly. And so I'm excited for that. I think they said it'll be coming out in 2027 or 2028. I'm leaning towards 2028. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are out for the Switch. $20 a piece. Get them. Those were key games for me growing up, and so there's a lot of nostalgia there for me, but they're still fun games. So that's the video game talk I have for you today. Happy anniversary, Pokemon. The future still looks bright. And I will see you guys all next week after the NHL trade deadline and my heart gets broken when you spelunk back into the Matt Cave.